She was standing in the corridor outside the Hargrove Hotel ballroom, and I knew her before my brain had even finished processing what my eyes were seeing. My body knew first. That was the thing nobody tells you about old wounds. They don't live in your memory. They live somewhere deeper, somewhere below language, coiled in the chest and the gut, waiting. My shoulders drew in, my breathing went shallow, my fingers tightened around the strap of my bag, and for just one terrible second I was 16 years old again, standing in a school corridor with a ruined art project and a face full of heat, while the most terrifying girl in the building laughed. Then the woman in the black suit turned around. Rhea Calder, 31 years old, 6 feet of controlled presence, dark hair pulled back, an earpiece in her left ear, and eyes the color of storm-washed slate. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't smirking. She was watching me with an expression so careful, so deliberately quiet, that it almost looked like pain. She said my name. Just that. Just Noelle. Not Miss Arden, not the way people said it now, with that slight reverential edge that came with having a streaming adaptation and a bestseller list credit. Just Noelle, soft and low, the way you say the name of something breakable. I stopped walking. Behind me, Julian was still talking into his phone about pre-event press access, oblivious. The hotel corridor was all gold light and muffled orchestral noise bleeding through the ballroom doors, and there was Rhea Calder standing between me and the rest of the evening like something inevitable. No, I said. That was the first word I said to her in 13 years. Just no. Before we return to the story, I just want to share a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, but the uncensored GL scenes and hotter videos will be available on my Patreon. Some moments are too spicy to include here, so if you want the fuller and bolder version, you can find the details in the description below. Julian caught up to me then, finally off his phone, and launched into an explanation before I could move or speak or breathe correctly. Apparently, the security firm my publisher had contracted had sent their best specialist, given the escalating nature of the letters I'd been receiving. Apparently, this specialist had an impeccable record in private protection. Apparently, she had been briefed on my schedule, my public appearances, my book tour routing, all of it. Apparently, nobody had thought to mention her name to me. I looked at Julian and then back at Rhea, and Rhea held my gaze without flinching, without making an excuse, without doing anything except standing there in that perfect stillness she had, which was so completely alien compared to the loud, electric girl she had been. "I need a different bodyguard," I said. Rhea said nothing. Julian said, "Noelle, the threat assessment?" "A different one," I repeated. What I didn't say, what I couldn't say in the gilded corridor of a 4-star hotel, with Julian looking between us like he'd stepped into a conversation 2 pages in, was this. This woman made me feel invisible for 3 years. She made me feel like I was a mistake that someone had forgotten to correct. She whispered things about me in hallways and smiled while she did it. She took something small and quiet that I was trying to be and made it smaller, quieter, more ashamed. She was the reason I learned to write in secret, because writing was the only place nothing could follow me. What I also didn't say was that she was still painfully beautiful, which felt like a personal betrayal by my own nervous system. Julian excused himself to make another call, promising to find an alternative by morning. Rhea watched him go and then looked back at me, and I was ready for something, ready for the old architecture of her, the easy cruelty, the superior tilt of the head. It didn't come. "I understand," she said simply. "You don't have to explain." "I know I don't," I said, sharper than I meant to. "I don't owe you an explanation." "No," she agreed, "you don't owe me anything." And she stepped aside, professionally, so I could pass into the ballroom. I went in, I smiled at the right people and signed the early print copies and had my photograph taken beside a cardboard standee of my own face, which was one of the stranger experiences of being a published novelist. Tessa found me 40 minutes in, appearing at my elbow with a glass of sparkling water and the expression she wore when she already knew something was wrong. "You look like you swallowed a key," she said. "Rhea Calder is outside." Tessa's hand stilled on her glass. Tessa had been my editor for 4 years and my closest friend for 7, and she knew things about my past that I'd never committed to any page with my own name on it. "The Rhea Calder? Do I know another one? As your bodyguard?" "Apparently." Tessa looked past me toward the ballroom entrance with an expression that could have etched glass. "Do you want me to go say something to her?" No. I took the sparkling water. Julian is finding someone else. Good. She squeezed my arm. You doing okay? I'm fine, I said, and we both knew what that meant, and Tessa let me have it, which was one of the reasons I loved her. The letters had started 8 weeks ago. The first few were strange, but not unprecedented. Public-facing women in creative careers collected a particular type of obsessive attention the way old houses collected water damage, slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. The early letters were long, rambling declarations of connection, the writer explaining in florid detail how my novel, The Distance Between Seasons, had unlocked something in them that no one else had ever touched. I had a publicist and a publisher and a PR protocol, and the letters went through the appropriate channels and were assessed and filed. Then they changed. The tone shifted around week 5. The declarations became demands. The writer began describing scenarios in which I had wronged them by not responding personally, by being seen in public with people who weren't them, by having the audacity to continue existing in a way that didn't center their feelings. The most recent letter had arrived 3 days ago and contained a photograph of me taken outside a bookshop in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon with a note that said only, "I know you see me." I hadn't seen anyone. That was the one that made my publisher stop treating it as a nuisance and start treating it as a threat. That was the one that had put Rhea Calder in a hotel corridor with an earpiece and a black jacket that fit like it had been tailored for someone who had no plans to ever need it to look soft. The evening moved forward the way those evenings do, all brightness and the particular performance of warmth that comes with public literary life. I was good at it now. I had spent enough years being the quiet girl who wanted nothing more than to disappear, that I had overcompensated in adulthood, learned to work a room, learned the difference between the smile that reached my eyes and the one that just covered my teeth. My books were about love because I understood longing better than I understood having. My characters were brave because I was writing toward something I hadn't yet become. 40 minutes before the event ended, one of the hotel staff approached me with an envelope. My name on the front. My real name, not my pen name. The one I hadn't published under. The one only people who knew me from before used. Inside was a single card. The handwriting was familiar. It said, "You looked beautiful tonight. You always look most beautiful when you don't know I'm watching." My hand started shaking before the rest of me caught up. The hotel staff member was already gone. Julian was across the room. Tessa was in a conversation with a literary agent near the bar. And then Rhea was there. I don't know where she came from. She must have been inside after all, positioned somewhere I hadn't clocked, doing her job with the same quiet competence that apparently defined her entire adult existence. She was beside me without me hearing her approach, and she said very quietly, "Give me the envelope. Don't react visibly." I handed it over because my body made the decision before my pride could intervene. She read it. Her jaw tightened, just once, just slightly. "When did this arrive?" "Just now, a staff member. I didn't see which one." "Are you hurt?" I almost laughed. Not hurt, no, just terrified in a way that lived behind my sternum rather than in any place you could bandage. "No. I'm going to need you to walk with me toward the east corridor as if we're having a casual conversation. Julian will follow when I signal him." I looked at her. "You're not my bodyguard." "I know," she said, "but someone who knows your real name just handed you a note inside a supposedly secure event, and you're shaking." A pause. Her voice dropped half a register. "I am not going to let anything happen to you, Noelle. I need you to know that." I walked with her. We moved Julian and the venue security manager through a debrief in one of the private event suites, and by 10 o'clock a new security perimeter had been assessed, and I was in the back of a car being driven to my apartment with 2 people from the venue firm flanking me. Rhea had given the envelope to Julian and stepped back professionally and completely, as if she understood exactly where her authority ended. I watched her through the car window as we pulled away. She stood on the pavement outside the hotel, hands clasped behind her back, watching the car go. She didn't wave. She didn't make any gesture at all. She just watched, and in the amber light of the city at night she looked like someone who was very good at remaining in place while things left her. My apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had original hardwood floors and a view of a city park that was beautiful in the way only places full of old trees can be. I had lived there for 3 years and decorated it slowly, the way someone furnishes a life they're still deciding to fully inhabit. There were books on every wall, obviously. There was a writing desk by the window with a lamp I'd had since university. There were flowers on the small kitchen table because I had decided somewhere around 26 that I was allowed to buy myself flowers. I sat on my sofa at 11:30 at night with a cup of chamomile cooling on the cushion beside me, and I thought about Rhea Calder, and I hated that I was thinking about Rhea Calder, and then my phone rang, and it was Julian telling me that the security firm had reviewed the threat level and was recommending 24-hour close protection until the stalker was identified, and that their strongest recommendation was Calder. "Julian, I told you. I know Noelle. Believe me, I know. But she has the highest success record in the firm. She's already briefed on your case, and given the escalation tonight, the next available specialist they consider comparable won't be free for 6 days." A pause. "I need you to at least have a conversation with her." I stared at my cooling tea. Outside, the park was dark and full of old trees, and someone was out there who knew my real name and stood in rooms watching me and thought that was a form of love. "Fine," I said. "A conversation." Rhea came to my apartment the next morning at 9. She wore dark trousers and a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and she carried a leather-bound case that I would later learn held her threat assessment documentation. She stood in my doorway and did not try to come in until I invited her, which I noticed, and which I filed away in the part of me that was keeping score. I made coffee because I didn't know what else to do with my hands, and we sat at the small kitchen table with its flowers between us, and I looked at her across the carnations and said, "I haven't decided anything." "I know," she said. "I want to be clear that this is a professional arrangement, if it happens, which I haven't decided." "That's appropriate." "And I want to be equally clear that I remember everything from school, and I'm not going to pretend that I don't, and I'm not going to perform forgiveness to make this easier." Something moved across her face, quiet and controlled, but there. "I would never ask you to." I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug. "Why did you take this case when you knew it was me?" She was quiet for a long moment. Not evasive quiet, but the kind of quiet that comes from wanting to answer honestly and making sure the words are the right ones. "Because when they briefed me on the threat level and showed me the photos the stalker had taken," she said, "I thought about you being afraid and having no one capable nearby, and I couldn't." Another pause. "I know that doesn't make it easier. I'm not offering it as a reason you should want me here. I'm just answering your question." I looked at her for a long time. "The file," I said finally. "Show me the threat assessment." We spent an hour going through it. She was methodical and clear and didn't condescend or soften anything, which I appreciated more than I would have admitted. The picture that emerged was of someone with extended surveillance capacity, access to my public schedule through probably legitimate channels, and a dangerous degree of emotional conviction that our relationship was real and mutual. The envelope at the hotel had been the most significant escalation they had gotten inside. When we finished, I looked up from the file and said, "Provisionally, and I mean provisionally, and the first time you make me feel like I'm 16 again, you're gone." Rhea nodded. "Understood." "Do you actually understand? Because I need you to know what that means, what it felt like." "Yes," she said, and then, very quietly, "I'm sorry, Noelle, for all of it." I didn't say anything back. I wasn't ready to, but I let the words sit in the space between us, and I didn't throw them out, and that was the most I could offer. The first week was an exercise in learning a new geometry. My life rearranged itself around Rhea's presence the way furniture rearranges around a large, unavoidable piece that you're not sure whether you resent or have already started to accommodate. She checked my apartment locks every morning and evening. She walked 2 steps behind me in crowds and beside me on quieter streets. She drove me to my publisher meetings and waited in the car or the lobby and appeared when I came out with the reliable timing of a tide. She spoke when necessary and not otherwise. She drank her coffee black and ate whatever was available and asked for nothing, which was in itself a form of communication I had to learn to read. She didn't apologize every day or perform remorse or make the situation about her past behavior. She simply did her job with a completeness that was irritatingly impressive. Tessa met her on the 3rd day when she came to pick me up for lunch and found Rhea in my kitchen checking the window locks. "So," Tessa said to me out of Rhea's earshot in the hallway, "she's hot." "Tessa." I'm just noting a fact. I'm your editor. I have to know things. She bullied me for 3 years. I know. Tessa's voice dropped its lightness. I also know she's standing in your kitchen making sure your windows lock properly. I'm not saying it fixes anything. I'm just saying the situation is complicated and possibly also she's hot. You're terrible, I said. I'm honest, she said, and kissed my cheek, and we went to lunch. Rhea ate a sandwich in the car and read a threat assessment report. I watched her through the restaurant window and tried not to think about her hands. On the 8th day, I came home from a panel discussion to find my apartment door ajar by 1.5 inches. I stopped in the hallway. Rhea stepped in front of me so smoothly it felt like gravity. She said, voice barely above a breath, "Stay here, don't move." She had her phone out and something in her jacket that I would later understand was standard issue for her firm, and she went through the door like someone who had done this kind of thing in actual war zones, which she had. She was inside for 4 minutes, which were the longest 4 minutes of my adult life, and then she came back and her expression told me before her words did. "Someone was here," she said. "They're gone now. We need to move you." My apartment, my flowers, my writing desk with the lamp I'd had since university, and the books on every wall, and the life I had furnished slowly like I was still deciding whether to fully inhabit it. "My laptop," I said, "my manuscript. We'll come back for essentials after the police have documented the scene. Right now we're leaving." She put her hand at my back, just once, just briefly, to guide me toward the stairwell. Through my coat I could feel the warmth of it, the steadiness, and I let myself be guided and hated myself for the relief. The police came. The scene was documented. Someone had gone through my desk drawers and my filing cabinet and left a photograph of me asleep on my sofa, the sofa in my apartment. The photograph had been taken through my window, which I had been told by the building management was not overlooked by anything. I sat in Julian's car while they worked, and I did not cry, which felt like its own kind of victory, and Rhea sat beside me and said nothing and didn't try to make it smaller. After an hour, she said, "There's a property outside the city. The firm uses it for close protection situations. It's secure and it's isolated and you'll be able to work there. This person has demonstrated they can access your building. You can't go back to your apartment." I thought about the flowers on my kitchen table. How long? Until we have them identified and contained. It could be days. It could be weeks. I won't lie to you about the timeline. I looked at her. She was watching me steadily. No drama in it, just fact. "If I go to this property," I said, "you'll be there." Yes. This becomes a full close protection detail at that point. I breathed in slowly. Outside the car window, the city went about its business with total indifference to what was happening to me, and I thought about all the ways fear could shrink a life if you let it. "Okay," I said. The safe house was a converted farmhouse about 90 minutes outside the city, set back from a narrow road between fields that were golden gray in the November light. It was larger than I expected, with a practical sitting room and a desk already set up with a monitor near the window that looked out over the fields, and a kitchen that smelled of wood smoke, and 2 bedrooms. Rhea showed me the security measures with professional thoroughness and without embellishment. Motion sensors. Reinforced locks. A second exit through the kitchen. "Which room is yours?" I asked. "I'll be in the main room." "There are 2 bedrooms." "I know, I'll sleep in the main room, for proximity to the entry points." I looked at her. "That doesn't sound comfortable." "It doesn't need to be comfortable, it needs to be functional." That was such a purely Rhea sentence that I didn't have an answer to it, so I found the room with the better light, unpacked my bag, set my laptop on the desk in the sitting room, and told myself this was fine, this was manageable, this was just a temporary arrangement born of a specific threat, and not anything else. We ate dinner across from each other that first night at the farmhouse table, and I noticed she'd found the ingredients for pasta in the kitchen cupboards and made it without saying anything about it, and I noticed the food was good, and I noticed I didn't mention either of these things to her. It was on the 3rd evening at the farmhouse that it happened, the confrontation that I had been circling since she appeared in the hotel corridor. I was supposed to be writing. I'd opened my manuscript and stared at a sentence for 45 minutes and written nothing new, because the part of my brain that usually opened into story was currently occupied with more immediate material. I closed my laptop and walked into the kitchen where Rhea was standing at the counter with a mug of coffee reading something on her phone, and I said, without having planned to say it, "Do you remember the art project?" She looked up slowly. "Year 10, I said. I'd been working on it for 3 weeks. It was a set of drawings, pen and ink, about the seasons. It was the best thing I'd made. I was proud of it, which was stupid, I know now, being proud of something like that around people who were going to—" My throat closed briefly. I pushed through it. "You took it out of my bag in the common room." "I didn't see you do it. I thought I'd lost it and I looked everywhere, and then during lunch I found it in the corridor outside the art room. Someone had drawn over every page, big looping letters, things I won't repeat, and underneath someone had written, 'Nobody wants to see your sad little drawings.'" The kitchen was very quiet. Rain had started against the farmhouse windows, a soft November rain without drama. "I know," Rhea said. Her voice was barely above normal volume. "Was it you, specifically, or one of—" "The drawing over your work was someone else. The words were mine." She put her coffee mug down. She wasn't looking at her phone anymore. She was looking at me like I was owed that, her full attention and nothing hidden. "I knew about it. I could have stopped it. I didn't, and then I made it worse. That's the truth." I had spent a lot of years with that memory. I had turned it over and looked at it from many directions. Sometimes it had made me angry, and sometimes it had made me sad, and sometimes it had made me feel the specific frozen shame of being young and creative and unprotected, and I had never once said it out loud to the person responsible. "It made me feel," I said carefully, "like wanting to make things was something to be ashamed of, like being someone who cared about beauty or words or art was a weakness. I almost didn't submit to my first creative writing program because of that feeling. I almost let that stop me." Rhea closed her eyes briefly. "I know," she said again, "and I know that me knowing now doesn't undo it. I'm not going to stand here and explain myself in a way that's meant to make you feel better about what I did, because I don't think you should feel better about it." Her voice was very even, very controlled, but I could see something underneath it, a tension in the line of her jaw. "I was cruel, and I was cowardly, and I was so desperate to stay inside the group I was in that I let that override any conscience I might have had. I made you feel small, and the things I made you feel are not things you should have had to carry." I was quiet. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I want you to know that clearly. That's not what this is about. You don't owe me anything, Noelle. Not then and not now." "Then why did you take this case?" "I told you. I couldn't let you be in danger." "That's very noble," I said, and it came out with an edge. "But I'm going to need you to understand that your guilt is not my responsibility to manage." "It isn't," she agreed immediately, "and I'm not asking you to manage it." I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who was so different from the girl I remembered, and yet still somehow identifiable beneath all that controlled stillness, and I said, "Okay," which meant nothing specific and everything necessary. She picked up her coffee. I went back to my laptop. The rain kept going against the windows, quiet and consistent, and I wrote 1,000 words that night, which was more than I'd written in a week. I found her at 4 a.m. on the 5th night, sitting in the main room with the lights low, her back to the wall, eyes on the door. She had a thermos of coffee and a tactical flashlight, and she was absolutely, completely awake. I stood in the hallway doorway in my socks and old university sweatshirt, and she looked up and her expression said she didn't think she'd been caught at anything. "You've been doing this every night," I said. It wasn't a question. "It's part of the assignment." "You're sleeping in shifts. I thought you said—" "I sleep for 3 hours and then I'm up. I don't need more than that." I didn't believe her entirely, but something in the way she said it made me understand that arguing about it would accomplish nothing and might humiliate her, so I said, "I'm going to make tea. Do you want anything?" A pause so brief it was almost imperceptible. "No, thank you." I made my tea and I brought it back to the hallway doorway, and I sat down on the floor with my back against the doorframe, which was close enough to keep her company and far enough to not intrude, and I said, "Tell me something." She looked at me. "What kind of something?" "Anything. I'm awake and it's 4 a.m. and I'm in a farmhouse because someone is following me, so anything." She thought about it with the same care she applied to everything. "I've been to 17 countries," she said eventually. "Most of them I barely saw." "Which one did you actually see?" "Iceland." A pause. I was on a job, but the client didn't need me for one afternoon, so I walked out to a beach made of black sand and watched the water for 2 hours. That's the most beautiful place I've ever been. I thought about that. Rhea Calder standing alone on a black sand beach watching the Atlantic, still and present in a way that the life she'd built around constant vigilance didn't usually allow. I'd like to go there, I said. You should. The farmhouse settled around us warm and safe, and the night went slowly and quietly toward morning, and I thought that this was the strangest thing, to be sitting on a floor in a November farmhouse with the girl who had made me feel worthless, and finding that this, right now, this was okay. The days developed their own rhythm. I wrote in the mornings. Rhea ran a perimeter check at dawn, and then disappeared into the background of the house in the way she had of being present without imposing. We ate lunch separately most days and dinner together most evenings, which happened gradually and without either of us naming it as a decision. She asked about my book once carefully, and I told her the premise, and she listened without interrupting, and at the end said, "How does she choose?" about the main character, and the question was so exactly the right one that I looked at her for a moment before answering. I noticed her hands the way I noticed everything about her, which was against my will and without my permission. Her hands were strong and careful, and there was a scar on her right palm that she'd never explained, and that I didn't ask about because asking would have been a form of intimacy I hadn't authorized. She remembered that I took 2 sugars in my tea, and that I needed to be near a window when I worked, and that I got a particular kind of quiet when I was processing something difficult, and that the quiet was not an invitation for conversation. She noticed these things not in a way that announced itself, but in a way that simply was, like furniture arranged to avoid obstacles, and I noticed her noticing, and I filed it somewhere I was not yet ready to examine. On the 8th day, my panic attack arrived. This had happened to me before, a handful of times over the years, and I knew the shape of them now, knew the warning signs, knew they weren't going to kill me even when they felt like they might. This one started in the late afternoon when I opened an email from Julian relaying the police update, which was no substantive progress, and something about reading those words in that flat professional language just buckled something in me. The walls of the farmhouse felt too close. My hands went cold. The edges of my vision did the particular thing they do. I sat down on the floor of the sitting room because it seemed safer than trying to reach the sofa, and I pressed my back against the wall and I focused on breathing, which was the one thing I knew to do. Rhea came in from outside within 2 minutes. She must have seen me through the window. She stopped in the doorway and I saw her take in the whole picture of me on the floor, my hands pressed flat to the floorboards, my breathing ragged, and she did something I didn't expect. She sat down on the floor across from me, back against the opposite wall, not touching, not crowding, just present. "You're safe," she said. Matter of fact, not performative. "I checked the perimeter 10 minutes ago. The locks are secure. You're safe here." I concentrated on her voice. "Can I come closer?" she asked. "Just that. Not assuming. Asking." I nodded. She moved to sit beside me, close enough that her shoulder was almost touching mine, and she said, "Do you want to count something?" "Some people find that helps." "I know," I said, between controlled breaths. "I know it helps. Just give me a minute." She gave me a minute. She gave me 4 minutes, actually, sitting on the floor of a farmhouse with me while my nervous system argued with itself, and she didn't try to fix it or minimize it or tell me I was okay when she didn't know that I was. She was just there, solid and warm and absolutely not going anywhere. When it passed, I was wrung out and slightly embarrassed, and she seemed to understand both of those things without requiring me to address either one. "Thank you," I said. "You don't have to thank me. I know. I'm doing it anyway." I felt more than heard her exhale. "Okay," she said. "Good." We sat on the floor for another 10 minutes, neither of us moving, and it was one of the stranger things I had experienced, that particular floor, that particular afternoon, and the particular feeling of not being alone in something I usually carried alone. The book gala was something I could not miss. It had been scheduled for 4 months, and my publisher had made it clear, in the diplomatic but inflexible language of publishing contracts, that my attendance was non-negotiable. It was the kind of event where literary awards were presented and deals were made, and people who had read your books would tell you what they meant in ways that simultaneously gratified and humbled you. It was also, per Rhea's threat assessment, a significant security risk. She had a plan because she always had a plan. Entry and exit routes were pre-walked. I would be on the floor for no more than 90 minutes. She would be with me throughout, which meant dressing in a way that would allow her to pass as my companion rather than a visible security presence, because visible security at literary events made journalists curious, and curious journalists were not what my publicist wanted. She came into the sitting room the evening of the gala in dark trousers and a deep charcoal jacket with sharp lines, her hair down for the first time since I'd known her as an adult, and the effect of all of it together was something I felt rather than saw, a kind of arrested attention that I tried to manage with dignity. Tessa, who had driven out to the farmhouse to accompany us and debrief me on the evening's expected attendees, said from the sofa, "You look absolutely devastating," to Rhea, who received this information with professional calm and said, "Thank you," and nothing else. I wore a dress the color of dark water because I had learned a long time ago that I worked best in colors that asked nothing of me, and we drove into the city in the back of a car that Rhea had pre-cleared, and the lights came up around us as we entered the city again, and I watched them through the window and thought about all the ways a person could be afraid and still choose to keep showing up. The gala was everything those evenings always are. Beautiful and loud and full of the specific performance of literary culture that I had come to understand as a second language. I was comfortable in it mostly, the way you are comfortable in a language you speak fluently but did not grow up in. Rhea stayed close throughout, hand often just at the small of my back, which was not a new sensation in a Bodyguard context but was a different sensation when it was her. I was talking to a short-listed poet I'd admired for years when a man named Fraser Whitmore appeared at my other shoulder. Fraser was a literary journalist and also, according to Tessa, generally considered to be extremely charming and extremely aware of it. He was both of these things. He was also clearly delighted to have cornered me. I saw Rhea's gaze track to him the moment he arrived. I saw it again when he laughed and touched my elbow. And I saw it a third time when he suggested I should let him interview me over dinner later that week, which I deflected politely, and I was aware throughout all of this of something very subtle happening in the quality of Rhea's stillness. Not a change exactly, more of a frequency shift. After Fraser moved on, I leaned slightly toward Rhea and said, very quietly, "That was interesting." "He's a journalist," she said. "Journalists who are too charming near clients make me cautious." "Is that the professional red?" A pause. "Yes," she said, very measured. I looked at the side of her face for a moment and felt something I had no business feeling, given everything between us, a warmth, a kind of pleased warmth, which I decided to file away in the same place I'd put the hands, and the scar, and the way she said my name. We left on schedule, and the car was waiting where it was supposed to be, and everything proceeded exactly as Rhea had planned it, because things proceeded exactly as Rhea planned them, which was one of the more simultaneously infuriating and reassuring qualities of her existence. In the car on the way back, Tessa fell asleep against the window within 20 minutes, and Rhea sat in the front with the driver, and I sat in the back with my sleeping best friend, and the city lights sliding past the glass, and I thought, something is happening to me, and I am not sure I can stop it, and I am not sure I want to, and I am not sure what that says about me. The actual crisis happened on a Thursday. I had returned to the city to sign stock at a mid-sized bookshop that carried all my titles and that I had a particular fondness for, because the owner had hand-sold my first book to 300 people before the adaptation deal, and I owed her something that felt larger than any commercial transaction could contain. It was a small private signing. Invite only, deliberately low profile. Rhea had assessed the risk as moderate and manageable with proper preparation. She had walked the shop floor twice and spoken to the owner and positioned herself near the entry. The man who entered at 7:40 had been invited. His name was on the list. He was a literature teacher from a nearby secondary school and had written what seemed to be a genuine letter of appreciation that had come through the publisher's standard channels. He had been invited to the signing through exactly the process designed for exactly this kind of reader. I don't know when I would have recognized him if Rhea hadn't moved first. He was at the signing table before I processed the look in his eyes, which was the look of someone who has been having a long, consuming conversation with someone who doesn't know they're in it. He said my name, not Miss Arden. He said Noelle with the specific familiarity of someone who had practiced it. He reached into his jacket. Rhea was between us before I saw her move. She had his arm, controlled and precise, and was speaking in a low, firm voice I had never heard her use but which absolutely communicated that this was ending, and two of the venue firm's people she'd positioned near the door were moving, and then it was over in the specific way sudden dangerous things are over, abruptly and leaving a shaking quiet. The thing in his jacket was a letter. That was all. A letter and a book, my first novel, with all the margins annotated in red, in a handwriting I recognized from 8 weeks of threat assessments. It was him. It had been him all along. The police arrived, and I sat in the bookshop owner's back office with a cup of tea I couldn't drink and Tessa on one side of me and Rhea standing near the door, and I was trying very hard to maintain the composure of a person who was not currently unraveling at several levels simultaneously. The police took a long time. Rhea came and sat across from me at some point and spoke to me in the same level, practical voice she used when she was helping me through the shape of things, and I watched her face and thought about 8 weeks of letters and photographs through windows, and someone standing in my apartment while I slept, and all the fear I had been carrying since it started. She had stopped him. She had read the room in a fraction of a second, and moved and stopped it. She had done exactly what she said she would do. When it was quiet and Tessa had stepped out to call Julian and the police were wrapping up in the shop floor, I said to Rhea, "You could have gotten hurt." He was not armed beyond the letter. I assessed that correctly. "You didn't know that when you moved." She looked at me steadily. "No, I didn't. So you moved anyway." "Yes. Without knowing if you were going to be hurt." "Noelle." Her voice was very quiet. "Yes." I looked at her. I was shaking slightly and I was angry, genuinely angry because she had put herself in front of something without knowing its dimensions, and something about that made me feel a kind of fear I didn't have a clean word for. "You can't do that," I said. "You can't just—" "I can and I will," she said, very simply, very finally. "You already hurt me," I said. And then I stopped, because I heard what I had actually said, which was not what I had meant to say, except that it was both things at once. The girl in the corridor with the ruined art project and the woman I was right now who could not look at Rhea Calder without feeling something ache. The silence between us had a different quality than all the previous silences. "I know," Rhea said. Her voice was the quietest I had ever heard it. "I know I did, and I'm sorry, Noelle. Every day. But I couldn't. I am not able to stand aside when someone could hurt you. I'm sorry that I can't be sorry about that." I was across the small back office and then somehow I wasn't, and I had her face in my hands and I kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a careful kiss. It was the kind of kiss that comes from fear and relief and anger and something much older and more complicated than either, and she kissed me back with everything she had while keeping her hands still at her sides, waiting until I pressed myself closer and made it unambiguous, and then her hands came up and held me like I was something she had not been sure she would ever be allowed to hold. We stayed like that for what felt like much longer than it was, and when we parted we were both very still and very close, and the fluorescent light of the bookshop office was unkind, in the way fluorescent light always is, and I looked at her and she looked at me, and her expression was something I had never seen on her before. Rhea pulled back. Not physically entirely, but in herself, in some internal way that I felt as clearly as if a door had closed. She stepped back to a professional distance and said, "I shouldn't have done that. I kissed you. I kissed you back." "That's unprofessional and inappropriate given the circumstances. You're afraid, and you've been under sustained stress for weeks, and you just experienced a threat incident and I'm your—" "Don't," I said. "Noelle, don't make my feelings into a symptom," I said. "Don't do that." She looked at me with everything she felt visible in her eyes and everything she felt carefully absent from her voice. "I don't think I'm the right person to be in this role anymore, given the way things are." "You mean because I kissed you?" "Because I want you to be safe and I need to be thinking clearly and I'm not—" She stopped, chose a different angle. "I should be replaced. I'll speak to the firm. Given that the immediate threat has been contained, this is a reasonable point to transition to—" "Rhea," I said. "Stop. I'm serious, Noelle. I don't want to take advantage—" "Then don't take advantage of me," I said. "That's not the same as leaving. That's not the same thing at all." She was very still. I'm going home, I said. Because I can go home now. And I want you to. I need time to. I need to think. Of course, she said, and then she called back her professional composure from wherever it lived and became my bodyguard again, and she handled the rest of the evening with competence and thoroughness and an absolutely impenetrable face, and I let her. Tessa drove me home, back to my apartment, which had been cleared and resecured while I was at the farmhouse, and which smelled faintly of cleaning products and the ghost of the flowers that had been there before. Someone, I would later discover, had replaced the flowers. There were fresh carnations on the kitchen table. I stood in my kitchen and looked at the carnations and thought, she put those there, or she had someone put them there, or someone anticipated that the first thing I would need when I came home was to have the space feel like mine again. And I thought about all the ways a person can try to make things right that aren't words. Tessa stayed until I was settled and then held me for a moment in the doorway and said, against my hair, "Whatever you decide, you know that, right? Whatever you decide." "I know," I said. "And for the record," she said, pulling back to look at me, "I think she's been in love with you since approximately the second day at the farmhouse. Possibly before, but I'm your editor and I'm biased toward happy endings." "Everyone's biased toward happy endings," I said. "Only the good ones are warranted," she said, and left. I sat at my writing desk for a long time that night. Not writing, just looking out at the park, which was dark and full of old trees that had survived far harsher winters than this. I thought about what Rhea had become and what she had been and the distance between those two things and how long it had taken her to cover it. I thought about a black sand beach and coffee drunk black and a floor at 4 a.m. I thought about hands that held me like something worth holding and then let go because she thought she wasn't allowed. I thought about what forgiveness actually meant, whether it was a door you opened all at once or something you opened slowly in winter light, when you finally realized that whatever you might let in was worth the cold. There were things I didn't know yet. I didn't know that Rhea had transferred out of 2 previous assignments when she first started in private security because neither of them had been the right fit. I didn't know that when her military service ended, she had spent 3 months in a small coastal town, writing letters she didn't send to people she had wronged as a teenager, trying to do the accounting of herself in a new way. I didn't know that in her apartment she had a copy of my first published short story, the one from a small literary journal 12 years ago under my real name, worn at the edges from handling. I found out about the short story from Tessa, who had found out from the firm's briefing file, which had included a personal statement Rhea had provided. The firm required these for close protection assignments where prior relationship existed. The statement was professional and factual, but it contained this line: "I have followed Ms. Arden's career from its beginning with private admiration and without contact, as I believed she would not want contact from me, and as I believed I did not deserve to make that connection." Tessa texted it to me with no commentary, which was, I thought, the most editorial decision she'd ever made. I called Rhea at 9 a.m. She picked up on the second ring. Because she would always pick up, that was not something that would ever change. "I want to talk to you," I said. "Not as client and bodyguard, as 2 people who need to have an honest conversation." A pause. "Okay," she said, "come here, to my apartment. Please." She came within the hour. I had made coffee and opened the window that looked over the park, and the morning was the kind of clear November morning that looks warmer than it is. She stood in my kitchen doorway and waited, and I handed her the coffee and I said, "I'm not going to tell you the past doesn't matter. It does matter. It changed things in me, and some of those things stayed changed, and I think that's honest." She nodded, listening. "But I'm also not going to pretend that who you are now is determined entirely by who you were then, because I am not who I was at 16, and I would not want to be held to that version of myself forever." Something moved through her expression very carefully. "I read the personal statement," I said, "the one in the briefing file." She was very still. "The short story, the one from the journal." "Noelle." "How long have you had it?" She looked at me for a moment that felt the length of something important. "Since it was published." "That was 12 years ago." "Yes." "That's." I stopped, looked down at my coffee, looked back up at her. "Why?" "Because it was extraordinary," she said, very simply, Because I read it and I thought she did it. She kept going. She made something extraordinary and I was... She stopped, cleared her throat. Proud is the wrong word. I had no right to be proud, but something like it, something like that. I thought about her alone in whatever apartment or barracks or temporary housing she'd occupied over 12 years, with a worn literary journal and whatever complicated feelings she'd had about the girl she'd once made feel worthless making something the world called extraordinary. I need to say something, she said, and then whatever you decide, I'll accept it. Say it. I love you. No preamble, no decoration, just the words, offered like something being placed carefully on a table. I don't say that to change anything or to make you feel obligated or to resolve anything about the past. I know that love doesn't erase what I did. I know it doesn't ask you to forgive me on any timeline. I'm saying it because it's true and because you deserve honesty and because I would rather have said it and lost you than never said it and always wondered. I put my coffee cup down. She was still standing in my kitchen doorway, and she looked like someone who had made themselves completely available to whatever came next. No defense and no expectation. If I choose this, I said carefully, I choose it because I want it, not because of fear or circumstance or proximity. You understand that? I understand, she said, and it won't be perfect. We're going to have to navigate. There's a lot between us. That doesn't disappear. I know. And you don't get to pull back again, I said. Not like that. Not without talking to me first. She was quiet for a moment, then, I know. I'm sorry for that. Okay, I said, and I crossed my kitchen and stood in front of her and looked up at her face, and she was looking at me with all that carefully controlled restraint and all that barely contained everything else, and I said, Hi. Her mouth curved. It was small and it was real and it was the most unguarded expression I had ever seen on her face, and it rearranged something in my chest permanently. Hi, she said. I kissed her again, and this time it was gentle and deliberate and entirely chosen, and her arms came around me and held me, and through the kitchen window the park was full of old trees in November light, and nothing was resolved or simple or without its scars, and it was one of the most complete moments of my life. We went slowly. I want to be honest about that, because the story I'm telling you isn't the kind where everything becomes easy just because it becomes clear. There were conversations that were uncomfortable and evenings that required careful navigation and moments where the old fear came up in me like a tide, unexpected, irrational, where I looked at her and felt the ghost of the girl she'd been and had to consciously, actively choose the woman she was now instead. She was patient about it in a way that never felt like patience as a strategy, but like patience as a genuine belief in the rightness of the pace. She never rushed me and she never made me feel slow. She stayed close because that was who she was now. That was what she'd become, but staying close was not the same as crowding. She knew the difference, had made the difference a kind of artistry. The stalker, whose name was David Carrig and who was indeed the literature teacher from the invite list, was charged with stalking and harassment. The case moved through the appropriate channels. I made a statement through my publisher and then tried, as much as possible, to stop letting it take up space that I needed for other things. Julian was relieved and immediately began discussing my next book tour with the kind of cheerful pragmatism that suggested he had not registered the emotional weight of the previous 8 weeks, which was both infuriating and, honestly, a little useful. Mara Ellison, the rival author I had briefly suspected of involvement because she had a history of making pointed public comments about my work, sent me a bottle of wine and a note saying she was glad I was safe, which resolved at least one subplot of my anxiety cleanly. Tessa took us both to dinner in January, Rhea and me together as an acknowledged thing for the first time in public, and she spent the meal being warmly protective and occasionally devastating in the way that only Tessa can be, asking Rhea direct questions about her intentions and her opinions on various literary matters and her thoughts on the proper temperature for sleeping in winter, and Rhea answered all of them with the same quiet seriousness she brought to everything. And at the end of the evening, Tessa hugged me in the restaurant doorway and said in my ear, "She's good. I don't say that easily." "I know," I said. "Neither do I." I started writing again. Really writing. The kind that felt like it was coming from somewhere true. The new book was different from the previous ones, less armored, more willing to look at the places where things hurt and sit with them rather than resolve them neatly. My editor, who was Tessa, read the first 100 pages and called me at 7 in the morning to tell me it was the best thing I'd written, and I believed her because she had no incentive to lie and every incentive to tell me if it wasn't working. The dedication page was the last thing I wrote. I wrote it and I deleted it and I wrote it again, and eventually I settled on this. For the woman who learned how to stay. I showed it to Rhea one morning in late February. We were in my apartment, which was fully mine again, my books on the walls and my lamp on my writing desk and flowers on the kitchen table, new carnations, pink ones this time. She was reading at the other end of the sofa with the specific quality of absorption she had when she read, which was total and quiet and somehow also present, and I handed her the laptop with the dedication page open and sat back and watched the window. I heard her breathe in slowly. After a moment she said, "Is this okay, to use something like this?" "It's mine to use," I said. "The whole book is mine, and that line is true." Another long pause. Noelle. Thank you. I looked at her. She was holding the laptop with both hands, looking at the screen, and the morning light from the window was on her face, and she looked like someone who had carried a very long weight for a very long time and had just been told they were allowed to put it down somewhere safe. "Don't thank me," I said. "Just keep staying." She looked up. Her eyes were very steady and very full. "I can do that," she said. That was in February. Now it is April, and the trees in the park outside my window are coming back into themselves, the particular tender green of early spring, and this morning I woke up and Rhea was already awake and had made coffee, which she does every morning, and she handed me a mug in bed with the same complete deliberate care that she brings to every small thing, and the light was coming through the curtains, and the city was just beginning its early noise outside, and it was so ordinary and so complete that I held the coffee mug and thought, this is what safety feels like when you built it yourself. She sat beside me on the edge of the bed and looked out the window, and I looked at the side of her face, the line of her jaw, and the particular way her eyes move when she is thinking about something she finds beautiful. "What are you looking at?" she asked, without turning. "The park," I said, which was true, partly. She smiled, still looking at the window. "The tree on the left has new leaves." "I know. I saw them yesterday." "First ones this year." I leaned my head against her shoulder. She was warm and solid, and she turned her head slightly, just slightly, and pressed her lips to my hair, and we stayed like that while the coffee cooled a little and the city gathered itself outside. I had been the girl who made herself small to survive. I had been the woman who made herself polished to protect the small girl she still was inside. I had written love stories because I understood absence and longing, because those were the textures of my interior life for such a long time. Now I was sitting in the April light with the person I had most feared becoming vulnerable to, and the fear had not disappeared. It had just changed shape, become smaller, become something I could hold in my hands without dropping, and I thought about all the years I had spent writing toward bravery and understood for the first time that bravery is not the absence of the old wounds. It is choosing, in spite of them, to let new things grow. The tree on the left had its first leaves of the year, pale and perfect and entirely new.